morning. Sorry for the delay. A little technical difficulties on a foggy Saturday morning in Baltimore. This is Jan Miles, Captain of the Pride of Baltimore, and behind the camera is Chief Mate Jeff Crosby.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well, and thanks for joining us this morning. So this morning we're going to be kicking off a series of going through the commands that Jan has had over the years and the experience that he's gained from those commands. So before we kind of get into the meat of that, can you just kind of describe your experience on boats up until the point of your first command?
So, Father was a very involved cruising sailor. So he'd owned a couple of pretty big boats before I was born.
Mm-hmm.
One was in the Chesapeake Bay, an oyster schooner from the Delaware Bay area, one of the clipper bow versions of it called the LCM Riker. And so he did quite a bit of cruising in the bay with that, between Annapolis, between the northern part of the bay and Washington. Later on, after the war, in Europe, he was posted there. He bought found and bought an English-designed gaff ketch, 45 feet, that is still sailing today and been spending the last 40, 50 years in the Martha's Vineyard area and sometimes the Bahamas, the Ayutthaya. And so he made it crack numerous times as I was growing up about my gestation period was in the Sea of the Hebrides, the Celtic Sea and the English Channel.
Yeah.
All my youngest life, whenever there was sailing accessible, that was the kind of thing we did.
Mm-hmm.
So after a career of foreign service, and I'm 14 years old and back in the States, I'm not getting into the society of it all. So I got into yacht delivery. And it was boats of as much as 60 foot of length, some motorboats, but mostly sailboats. Delivering them anywhere from Nova Scotia through Panama, all the East Coast, sometimes the Caribbean and the West Coast. So by the time I was 18, I got enough experience to have easily a log for a license. So my first career work was being an instructor operator at a summer camp school, because I was still in school, mostly community college stuff. So summertime I was doing that. And then my first real sort of sail training mate job was brilliant. And I took on that job at the age of 21, and they were dubious at my age.
Sure. Yeah.
So it was a trial for the summer, and I managed to win the job. So I was there for 5 years as year-round job, summertimes operating the boat as a mate, and then maintenance in the wintertime. And I got to know a lot of the other vessels around. So I eventually went to mate on the schooner Bill of Rights for a summer. Did a cruise with a gaff ketch, 2 English fellas, all the way down to the Falkland Islands and back again from Antigua, round trip from Antigua. So learned quite a bit about the business of stocking a vessel. That was probably the most elemental aspect of that trip, was just recognizing how you could stock a boat without refrigeration. My ocean sailing had been a lot beforehand because of the delivery work, so the ocean work was not unfamiliar to me when we went down to Antigua. And then the square rigger brig, full brig Unicorn, I was spent about a year on her, and I was second mate for a while, most of the time, and then a little bit as chief mate. So there was that whole crew, multiple crews. She was a crew of 12. So learning that whole management system with this, I had 2 different skippers. Steve Cobb was the first one, and suddenly lost his name. No. He's up in Maine. Why is that? So anyhow, getting older, I guess.
That's it. Sure.
J.B. Smith, and then I had my first command, and that was a ferrous cement schooner built in Maine, sailing out of the end of Long Island area, and
Sure.
that job was a big project.
So your first command was the Rachel and Ebenezer, and as you mentioned before, she's a ferrous cement schooner. What else can you tell us about her, just characteristic wise, about her build, her rig, etc.?
She'd be a model of a somewhat yachtified model of a coaster schooner, classic American coaster schooner. What was a bit unique about that was she had a break in the deck.
Oh,
so she had a raised quarter. And she had originally been drawn as a 100-footer. Somewhere along the line, pretty early on, they shortened her. So she has a quite extreme shear, uncommon to the American coaster schooner. As a ferrous cement boat, that was totally new to me. I'd read about it, and she'd been around for 3-4 years, sailing summer times in the windjammer trade, day sail trade.
Mm-hmm.
When the family communicated with me, they wanted me to assume command of her, to deliver her to the Virgin Islands for partnering up with an organization called Dorigo Cruises.
Okay.
And they owned Harvey Gamage, and they'd been for a long time, quite a while, been doing some winter times down in the Virgin Islands and summer times up in New England. And so this was going to be expanding that because there was quite a lot of popularity. This is late 70s, early 80s. And so they saw a market for expanding it. So the two boats worked more or less in tandem.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a delivery down there, operate for the winter, and a delivery home. And so she had never done any real ocean work. And of course, in summertime sailing, it was just anchor every night, sail during the day, anchor every night. So she was never been to sea, never been developed for that. So there was quite a bit of planning for that, getting the boat physically ready in the rig. She had no rat boards or rat loons, so we had to rattle her down, resurface everything. And so the prep for that was pretty involved. The delivery was pretty involved. Learned the trade from working with Harvey Gamage, and it was just like up in New England. You change on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday. Monday you take off after a lot of rushing around getting the last minute things on board. And then the only oddity was that you're going across international border each beginning and end of these cruises, because you went into the British Virgin Islands.
Yeah.
And there was a whole process of that. Of course, the Coast Guard had a say in the matter as well, in the sense that the boat was cleared for eastern Long Island, but had to be cleared for doing this work. And there was a fair amount of steps to take to convert for international border crossing with a Subchapter T vessel. But all that got sorted out. But every Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning, you would go to the British Virgin Island Custom House and get cleared in, and then sometimes it was as late as Wednesday, because we would do it up at a different island, and Joost Van Dyke, and that was the way it was. That's right. The British side was Joost Van Dyke, and the American side was Cruz Bay and St. John's. So that's what it was. You had to clear out, then clear in, and then go through the BVIs, and then clear back into the States again at St. John's, and then go. So clockwork, week after week after week.
Almost like a train.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So what experiences did you have that you experienced for the first time being in command of a vessel?
Well, the first one was just the delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was new about that vessel doing the delivery, and then me being faced with that challenge. Every vessel I've gotten on had already, we talk about yacht delivery and how yacht delivery can really present you with some oddities, particularly if you're doing the boat show boats. because they're not necessarily prepared.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a very vague sense of that since that was all in my high school years. So brilliant, you come aboard a well-found boat. And then when I did some other cruising during my time at Mystic, those 6 years with Yacht Delivery helping my dad, that was all found. He'd set it up, I was just there to help out.
Sure.
So, so it was drawing upon everything I'd witnessed before, helping with the cruise down to the Virgin Islands. From Antigua down to the Falkland Islands. You know, calling upon all of that preparation. And cruising with Dad, there was a lot of preparation that was going on that you got introduced to. The whole process of taking a 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old and being a team for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing the needs. And when we had failures, we did a delivery of a newly bought boat to us when I was, I guess it was 16. And we were coming down from New York along the Jersey coast when the universal joint, that is the connection between the tiller and the rudder, failed.
Mm.
So we could twist the tiller but not the rudder.
Yeah.
And just walking through that whole decision as to how to deal with that. I had very calm weather, and we're able to sail by a fishing vessel and ask them, this is like 1967 or something like that, ask them to call the Coast Guard, so somebody from Barnegat comes out, throws us in, and then Dad deals with it. You know, we go home, and he, maybe a month later we came back and got the boat and finished the trip. But anyway, that was a 21-footer, so it was really a small boat.
Yeah.
A Cape Cod shipbuilding thing called a Golden Eye. It was a Herreshoff hull form design, but made in fiberglass and a jib-headed mast arrangement. So all these things came together for the Rachel Ebenezer.
Sure.
And also hiring a crew. There was no crew for the boat for making it, so I did all of that. And the owner was very supportive because she was I don't know how it is they came so wedded to the idea. They made 3 offers to ask me to come and make the command. And I was busy with the brig and dubious as to whether I was ready.
Right, sure.
And after a very intimate conversation with finally going and taking the interview and seeing the boat and having a conversation, I said, okay. After clarifying, they understood how much it was going to cost.
Yeah.
The boat had never been to sea.
There's going to be hidden expenses. There's all that preparation. There's stocking the boat. Yeah, that's not a cheap venture.
Yeah, and so when I was convinced that they were prepared for that, I wound up doing it 2 winters in a row and taking a bit of a summer break. I did relief work with skippering work with 3 boats that year. The Clearwater, that summer, Clearwater for 3 weeks, nearly a month with the Bowditch, and then just a quick stand-in 5-day period on the Harvey Gamage, and then came back up to Peconic and picked up the Peconic Bay, Greenport, picked up the Rachel Ebenezer, and did another full season.
So your first command being the Rachel Ebenezer kind of just opened up the doors, and then you wandered around on a bunch of different boats all in the same time period?
Almost. Almost. It's funny how long it took me to go to command.
Sure.
I got berated quite strongly by a gentleman who in Mystic who said, "Jan, you're so experienced as a mate. Why aren't you out there being willing to be a skipper?"
Yeah.
And there was a lot of explosion of boats. There was a lot of need for skippers, and not the sort of the ones who thought they were all, just because they had a license, thought they knew what they were doing. That was one of the things that we all observed was that licensing didn't make you the sailor.
Yeah.
Licensing gave you the opportunity to work as a sailor, but it didn't mean you were a sailor. And so you pass the multiple choice test, and then it still falls on the person doing the hiring to figure out if they're choosing correctly. And when there's expanding boats, you have a drawdown of the skippers, you have a drawdown of those who really know what they're doing versus having the paper. And it's all kinds of degrees in between as to can they even learn fast enough what they don't know?
Yeah.
So the summer of me being unassigned to a ship, because I was between seasons with the Rachel Ebenezer, meant that I was sort of like, I didn't expect to work, and then somebody would give me a shout. And so that was very serendipitous. It was, and I wasn't
Sure.
overly busy either. I was just, sure, I'd take that and
Yeah.
do that, and otherwise I was chilling. And so that was a lot of interest on my part, because everything was different. The Bowditch is a yacht schooner that had a very mixed life of being a commercial fishing vessel, motor vessel for a while before she was rebuilt again and turned into a windjammer for up in Maine.
Mm-hmm.
The Clearwater, of course, is unique in her own way,
What makes the Clearwater unique? Can you kind of spend a bit of time describing what she is and what program she runs and kind of her history?
Sure. Clearwater is a pretty decent representation of the way cargo was moved in the Hudson River.
Mm-hmm.
And these are single stick vessels, vertical mast, often with a topmast, with a bowsprit, but they were basically very, very blunt bowed, without being square, but very, very blunt bowed sailing vessels that could carry cargo not only below but also on deck.
Mm-hmm.
And they would move stone quite a lot up and down the Hudson River, and they were massive boom lengths for their size. Sort of imagine a catboat with a bowsprit on it.
Sure. Yeah.
So the boom is going the full length of the boat and sticking out the stern, and then they have this bowsprit with for a jib. And so it's just a 3-sail vessel. It's just a staysail. It's a self-tending staysail arrangement that they do with a club. It's a sort of a flying club arrangement, and then a gaff main, and then a topsail. And so the river is commonly running wind either up or down the river. So these vessels would claw their way to windward the best they could, and they were centerboard boats.
Mm-hmm.
So they could turn very quickly for their size. And they weren't overly deep, but they could get deep and burdensome loaded down, because they would
Sure.
fill them up. They didn't use the Plimsoll mark thing for freeboard, so they'd get them down pretty low. And they weren't meant to be sailed at an angle of heel.
Yeah.
Not because they tip over necessarily, although that was probably there. It's just that, you know, you were so close to the wall and you didn't want to put the water on deck.
Yeah.
So the way they managed the vessels, one of the things that was quite fun to play with, but you had to be careful about it, was the business of the flying jibe, what they referred to as the North River jibe. And it's otherwise in my jargon as a modern boat sailor, classical as well as modern, what is the flying jibe, where you don't manage the sheet at all. So this boom is 90 degrees to the boat.
Yeah.
You're coming to a shore, you got a jiber, so you don't sheet it in. Because of the centerboard, you can turn the boat really fast. So what you do is you do a slow entry into the, depending upon the wind strength, a slow entry into sailing into the mainsail by the lee.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it breaks, and is now going to swing like a big wind vane all the way around, you throw the helm down hard, get her to turn rapidly towards the new direction, but higher.
Mm-hmm.
So that as the mainsail comes around, it's going to wind up being backwinded before it fetches up on the sheet. Now you got 5 parts, because it's 2 blocks of either 2 and 3, or possibly 3 and 3 shivs, and minimum 2 and 2 shivs, is you got 4 to 6 parts. Now if there's enough centrifugal force in the swing, that sheet, which is now on a, say you're a 60-foot boom,
Yeah.
you've made, if the boom is out 90 degrees, you've made a hypotenuse. And if the boat's 60 feet long, so that's a lot of rope that's going to hang down on the water, or it's going and then swept aft.
Yeah.
Or it's going to, and then of course the going fast is going to swing around the stern. and get hung up going underneath the counter and coming over the top. And if you have
So you got to be pretty mindful of that.
yeah, so you have to have somebody grab the sheets and put them in a bundle and
grab it and toss them over the side and the other way.
And we do that a little bit on Pride, as you've seen. And we have 2 trainings with Pride. We have the experience of trying to get the preventer boom tackle across without it being crazy. But we also, if we do a flying job, when very light air, we'll do that with Pride. We also manage the all those parts to flip them over. It's like dealing with a big skip rope arrangement where you try to flip it across. So the North River jibe means that the mainsail comes against the wind before it fetches up, and then you bear off again and you sail along. And I did that, I don't know, 1 or 2 times while I was aboard the boat, but we were busy. That boat was very busy with the business of the river, education of the river. It was 4th grade kids most of the time. Yeah. And there'd be 2 groups a day in a particular location, and they would set up with schools in a different location for 2 or 3 days everywhere they went. And we were in the Lower Bay most of the time, between Staten Island and New York, Manhattan, for the 3 weeks I was aboard, and then up into Long Island over to Connecticut for a bit before I was, one of the regular skippers came back and I wandered off. So she was great for learning also how to gain the trust of crew.
Oh, sure.
The skipper who I was relieving as a permanent skipper there said, you know, I think I set you up for a problem. And I said, what do you mean?
That's always really wonderful to walk into.
She said that she told the crew they could learn something from me, which just insulted the hell out of them.
Sure.
Said that, okay.
Learn something from this guy. We've been here the whole time.
So I spent my whole first week just asking questions. So how do you do this? Okay. How do you do that? Okay. What's your procedure here? Okay. I never gave them an order. I said, well, how do you do this? Go ahead. So after a while, they relaxed a little bit, and then we had a pretty good time just exchanging and doing the job and exchanging information. And there were a couple of times I said, we had a wind on a dock situation. I said, have you ever tried fiddling with this? What's been the procedure in the past? And so they described what they'd witnessed, not being skippers themselves, but seeing how it was handled. Said, okay, well, let's try it this way. And so it was much more collaborative the last 2 weeks, but the first week was
a little bit walking on eggshells.
I won't tell you anything. You tell me.
So in that year of working on the Rachel and Ebenezer, the Clearwater, the Bowditch, and Harvey Gamage, what are some things that you learned on those boats kind of as your introductory into command in this industry that you've then later brought to Pride?
Well, I think it wasn't so much that I learned specific things thinking this far away from that time, but it was that it was the routine. Mm-hmm. So the big voyage plan for the Rachel and Ebenezer was getting her to the Caribbean and then getting her set up cosmetically and for the work, because we got there a month ahead of time, and then we had a full boat all the time. Mm-hmm. So it was getting a lay of the land. I'd not been in Charlotte Amalie before, except passing through. So learning from the Dorigo Cruise gang the contacts and the systems, and working it through with the owner about billing and purchasing. But setup, it was always setup. And back in those days, you didn't have electronic banking, so you had to spend some time going to the bank.
Yeah.
And figuring that out so that the pattern, and that was done by Dorigo. Dorigo figured out the pattern. You board on a Sunday afternoon, late afternoon, and that's a bit of a soiree scenario. And then the first full meal is the Monday morning breakfast, and that's when there's a lot of scrambling going on. The mate's going this way. As soon as the cook gets the cooking done for the food, they're gone to do the final shop. And if I have any administrative work, that's the banking time, and get that done in the morning so that you're back, so you can leave not much later than about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning, because you still need to sail and go somewhere for the anchorage.
Yeah.
And so that's
Get off the dock.
and that's a beat to windward, bouncing around in the trades. With that boat, it was bouncing around. Tack for tack over to the St. John's, over to the eastern, and then you can start to settle in. So I guess from step to step, it's just recognizing that while boats are different and scenarios are different, your fundamentals are the same.
Sure.
So then it's about communication. Who are you sailing with, and what's going on with them relative to you? So with the temporary stuff, it was a lot of just, for instance, in the Bowditch, I was working with the owner, who was a skipper up in Maine, but didn't feel confident about coming down to Newport to be a part of what was going on there with the America's Cup that year. He was extending his season by coming down, so he hired me to be the person to run the boat, but he was on board. So it was a lot of this communication about me making sure I understood their style, their way, and then got the job done. And when it came to the 1 5-day period, they had on the Gamage, they have an education program.
Yeah.
And they're a 2-captain boat because of the way the licensing worked at the time. So I was just working with the other captain, but I was designated, because of my experience, I was designated as the senior captain of the two, but totally qualified. So I was just fitting in. And so it was sort of like, hey, if I wanted to do something different, I was working with the ocean research guy. I wanted to do they wanted to do a set of grabs down in the Chesapeake Bay, and you'd have to stop the boat, drop it, grab mud, pick it up. So I wanted to do it under sail.
Sure.
So we played with that, and at one point the research guy said, hey, we gotta have the boat stopped. Okay, I knew that I could fall back on just motoring around to do it.
Sure.
But I was still trying to do it under sail, so it was a process of learning those tricks of the boat, some of which I was getting from the other captain, some of which I was figuring out on my own, or just recognizing because of current how to deal with it. And so it was mostly get to study the boat. What's the geometry of the boat? What's the arrangement? And so what are characteristics? Heaving to on the sloop Clearwater, we played with that for a little bit.
Oh, sure.
And that wasn't
That's gotta be
as
pretty
obvious as you might think. It was calm day. It was a light day, smooth sea, so it was really not a great test for how to apply heaving to other vessels out elsewhere.
Right.
But that was still an interesting exercise to go through, and it failed 2 or 3 times until we got it right. And so going to your question, it's a process of looking and not making assumptions in a black and white way, but saying, should probably do this, should probably do that, should probably respond to this, and then you just watch as you do it, and you watch again and again. Everything is decided by the process of the progress, and either it's not working or it's working too well, and there's the in between.
You got to find that happy middle ground.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. So that was your introduction into being a master in the industry. Moving on from there, you joined the schooner When and If. Can you describe a little bit about the When and If, what she is and what she does, and your role?
In between that, I got invited to the Pride of Baltimore.
You did?
And the first Pride came before the When and If. And that probably surprised more people. So why is Jan being asked to sail the Pride of Baltimore? What has he ever been on that applies to that type of vessel?
Sure.
And I wasn't sensitive to it at the time. I was one of 3 candidates that Armin was talking to give him relief for about 3 months, because he'd be coming to the end of a full year on board. So I get this phone call in the Virgin Islands while I'm on the Rachel Ebenezer. Hey, Jan, would you be interested in running the Pride? And I said, sure. what's going on? I said, well, I'm talking to 2 others as well, so let me get done with all of these conversations and see how it turns out. So it's about 4 months later, I get another call from Armin. He says, hey, Jan, you still interested? I said, sure. Okay, great. I said, what happened to the other 2? He said they had become unavailable. So last man standing.
Sure.
I get the job as the captain of the Pride of Baltimore. And again, my approach is you look, you observe, and you go forward. And so, but I learned later, probably 2-3 years later, there was a number of surprises that I got selected for that because of my background being in a schooner yacht, the Brilliant,
Yeah.
and then the clunky old Rachel and Ebenezer. And so I think a lot of people would forget that I was on the Unicorn, or maybe they knew I was Unicorn, but that's a brig, and so altogether different. So anyway, it didn't matter because I got hired, and I took my lead from Armin.
Sure.
And Armin's sort of had already laid the groundwork for the company, and all of it made sense to me in terms of the mission. Sure, I get that, and the crew being ambassadors, not just catering kind of crew. They were actually the guest co-hosts. I mean,
Sure.
and so it was just about getting the job done from port to port to port, and that was probably the most challenging in the sense of a learning curve of recognizing how to balance the needs of the vessel as I interpreted them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also a cosmetic thing. And then also the demand of the whole crew in terms of mission.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd be sailing day and night between ports, and then you were doing deck things maintenance-wise, unless you were chartered by a business. And so we'd get in on a Wednesday or Thursday. We'd be corporate activities during the day
Mm-hmm.
and evening. Then on the weekends, we'd have general public for 5 hours each day. And then if we were there for a Monday, Tuesday, because there's enough corporations using the boat and government from the state of Maryland, city of Baltimore, when do you do maintenance?
Yeah.
And when do you get any rest? And you have enough crew that you can do this port and starboard thing, 5 and 5, in a team. We didn't have any day sails with that boat because she wasn't certified.
Right.
So it was all dockside. And so it was exhausting, and I came close to burning the crew down to the point that they would walk off the boat.
Sure.
And I had a meeting with them at one point when it's got to a point that I finally registered how important it was.
Yeah.
I said, look, I get it that you guys are feeling burning at 2 ends, and I think we have a way of going forward that this won't continue. And I described it. I said, what do you think? Are you guys going to stick it out, or do we start again altogether? And they gave me a chance to do that. And so it worked. It still was work, but it worked because they could now look forward to a pattern. Now,
Sure.
the inward trip into the Great Lakes was already way beyond the proper planning because we hadn't considered the delay that the locks would represent. And you're fighting your way to windward, you're fighting against the current, you're going through the locks, it's on and on and on and on, and half crew handling the boat in the locks. You've had this experience with the second boat.
Yeah.
The management, the people energy, mental energy, as well as physical management is easily overlooked in terms of the sequence of events. And so
Sure.
building time in front of going through the locks, a whole series of them, or building it into afterwards, it never occurred with the first boat.
Oh man.
It was quick.
That sounds really fun.
Yeah. So while some of the burning out wasn't because of me,
Right.
because I was persistent about meeting the schedule, it did revert to me. And then there was this, we got to smile and be nice to everybody when we didn't want to be nice to ourselves.
Right.
We just
no
wanted
kidding.
So I had this sort of mea culpa with the gang, and I said, look, okay, I get it. Not that I haven't gotten it, just that I need to change this around. This is what I'm thinking. They gave me the chance, and then we had a very successful rest of the year. But it was still hard. It was still tough because it was on the calendar. It was just 100 miles a day.
Yeah.
We didn't account for the day of departure and the day of the arrival being half days, which meant that we were losing a full whole day of calculus because otherwise you'd have to leave at midnight and arrive at, so anyway, that was that big learning thing. The boat itself was not a mystery to me. As different as she is among American schooners, it wasn't a mystery. It was like you look at it, you understand the loose-footed foresail, and it was more about teamwork technique because everything took at least 3 people.
Sure.
So all new crew. Only one person from Armin's crew stayed on. So our learning curve of the ship in terms of just getting our systems down and our maintenance needs down, that was pretty steep for everybody. And then me my big error when it came to the mission, the boat's tied up in Halifax on the way into the Great Lakes, and one of the crew said, "Hey, Jan, there's some folks here that came off a bus. They're from Maryland." I said, "Okay, I'm in a meeting." I said, "I'll be up in a minute." Forgot all about it. Turned into a letter to the editor of the Baltimore Sun.
Oh, man.
So I got like, oh. So, apologies to the executive director, apologies to the board, and never forgetting to drop everything the moment that kind of thing happened. I'm from Maryland too. I want to say hello to the captain. You jumped right. You dropped everything.
I'll be
you
right
jumped
there.
up and say. So from a sailing point of view, it wasn't a problem. It was all this other stuff like I have to be there when.
Yeah.
How much time do we have? And we got to paint this, and why can't we paint this? And when is time off? It's all that stuff.
Sure, learning the logistics of how these boats stay alive. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that brings us to the end of our time today. We're going to be continuing on this series, not next week, but the week following, starting with the When and If and your experience there. Next Saturday, we're going to be bringing in the chair of our board, Jason Williams, to have a conversation with him. So, Captain Miles, do you have any parting words for us this morning?
Stay diligent.